just call the priest, man.
Well, call the right priest.
Yeah, just call the right priest.
Ask the ghost what their beliefs are, and then make sure the right priest shows up for your ghost.
Yeah. You gotta shop around with your priest. You gotta find the good. It's like finding a therapist. You gotta find the right match. So
Spiritual BetterHelp.
Spiritual BetterHelp. You gotta find the right one to fit your needs. Welcome, everybody, to Unraveling the Unexplained. My name is Kat, and I'm a longtime astral traveler and spirit consultant. If you're new here, welcome and thank you. This is my brother John. He's a longtime fan of the creepy and the paranormal.
Hello, folks.
He has picked out a video for me to react to. I don't know what it is, but we are about to find out together.
The exact date has seemingly been lost to time, but there was an evening in the late 1700s where an event would take place that would not only alter one family's lives, but potentially frame how many of us view the topic of the paranormal. It happened in the southern part of Jefferson County, West Virginia, a tiny village named Middleway. The Livingston family had gotten themselves all warm and cozy for the evening, when out of nowhere, they heard 3 loud bangs on their door. Cautiously, the father, Adam Livingston, stood up and slowly approached the door and opened it. There stood a man in well-worn clothing. In an Irish accent, he spoke to Adam, telling him he had gotten lost and was simply looking for somewhere to stay for the night. Adam Livingston had a reputation of being a kind, generous and hospitable man, and he welcomed the stranger into his home.
I kind of love these old-timey stories because you can almost feel they've all got an element of similar, like, stranger danger happening. You know, like, remember the last one we did where it was the, what was it, the skinwalkers, and somebody was knocking at the door too. So there's these kind of old-timey stories. There's almost always some element of fable or something you shouldn't have done, be afraid of people and things like that.
Well, yeah, you got to think that back then nobody had security systems. It's just anybody can walk up to your door.
I mean, anybody can still walk up to your door. You're kind of right in that, like, homesteads were a lot further apart. You were probably a lot further away from your closest neighbor. Communications were not, you couldn't just call the police.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying.
So there was a sense of isolation for people, basically.
This story predates the infamous Blair Witch haunting, and is referred to by some as America's first poltergeist. Much of the story of Wizard Clip was passed along as oral history throughout the area, although there are multiple written accounts that come later. It's time to return to that rainy night at the Livingston house. The stranger entered the Livingston home. They gave him dry clothes and let him warm himself by the fire, as Mary gave the stranger food. While he was clearly appreciative, he was notably quiet. It didn't take long before he retired to his temporary bedroom for the evening. Mary noted to Adam that the man did not look well. The family were woken in the middle of the night to sounds of hoarse coughing. Adam knocked on the door before entering, and found the stranger sat on his bed, in a much worse state than before. The stranger didn't ask for a doctor, however. He requested that Adam go and get a Catholic priest. There are 2 possible explanations for Adam's response to the stranger's request. One being the Livingston property was close to 40 miles away from the closest Catholic priest. The other more widely reported reason, though, is that the Livingstons were a Lutheran family, and at the time the idea of inviting a Catholic priest into his home would have been unthinkable. He had never seen one, and probably held very extraordinary ideas of Catholic priests. Many of his class believed priests were Satan's living emissaries, with horns like their master, and other equally enlightened fancies. The stranger continued to beg for a priest, but it wouldn't last long. Just after midnight, the stranger passed away. The following morning, Adam Livingston buried the stranger's body in unconsecrated ground on his farmland. That night, Adam found himself awoken multiple times to the sounds of horses galloping. Each time he would get up, look out his window and see nothing. It sounded as if they were inside its walls. The following evening, hot coals started to shoot out from the family's fireplace throughout the evening as they sat around it. They were repeatedly forced to put out small fires that began erupting throughout their home after each attack. Eventually it happened with such frequency that the family were forced to put out the fire entirely. On several occasions, various members of the family would retreat to their bedrooms for the evening, only to find their bed engulfed in flames.
So it's not entirely impossible that someone with strong religious convictions who transitions, believing that they did not get the absolution they needed in order to go to heaven or whatever they think is going to happen,
Would end up sticking around.
ends up sticking around in a non-corporeal state and is angry about the situation because they feel they did not get the opportunity to confess, and now they must be some sort of condemned demon or something. What would be unusual is that they would have the capacity or the understanding at that very early stage to make effects in the physical environment that way. Maybe angry enough to, by sheer force of like displeasure at the situation, to force something. I mean,
Pissed off enough to actually
yeah,
affect things.
energy is energy, and if you're mad enough, it's possible. But I, I don't know how to describe it, but being outside of your physical form, but in the physical environment, is very disorienting. It'd be very unusual for a newly transitioned individual to be able to have effects on the physical environment in that way. That takes
Is that the
practice.
kind of thing that requires concentration or focus or
Um, requiring a lot more practice and a lot more understanding about what's happened and how to affect your own compression of energy in a non-corporeal state. Actual instances of things moving, flying off shelves, things like that are not as common as, say, seeing a shadow run past your eye, or feeling a presence in the room. Like there's a reason why it's way less common for actual physical effects to be taking place.
kind of why you separate regular hauntings from actual poltergeists?
Yeah, because by the time you get that comfortable with manipulating your energy on the corporeal field like that, most have moved on, have actually, ascended, changed their energy, moved on from this plane. Most don't hang around long enough to get to a state where you're actually affecting the physical environment that way. I suppose it's possible that an angry enough something is doing things unintentionally, like blustering, angry, shouting, and that
Throwing enough of a tantrum.
that it's having a sort of unintentional side effect of creating some sort of disturbances in the physical plane is possible, I suppose.
The nocturnal sounds became a consistent visitor as well. More common than the horses was the banging, most commonly coming from inside the walls of the house, with seemingly no source. The banging would keep the family awake, sleep deprived and terrified about what could possibly be tormenting them. The activity wasn't just left to the evenings.
At what point do you actually go get the Catholic priest?
Yeah.
Like, okay, maybe we should have done this to begin with, but I think maybe we need to it's time to call in the Catholic priest, see if we can't convince this guy to cross over.
And a possible source for the banging sounds was identified when the family claimed that before their very eyes, in the middle of the day, they would see their furniture move across the room, bash into the walls, and sometimes return to its original place. Dishes would seemingly be thrown from the shelves, crashing to the floor around the children, who would scream in fear as they sat in the kitchen. It was around this time Midway Village got the strange nickname of Cliptown, and the apparent haunting started to gain a sense of notoriety in the surrounding area. The family would begin to hear the strange sound of shears opening and shutting around their home, yet again with no apparent source. Soon they began to notice what was happening. Small crescent moon-like shapes were being cut into any fabric items around their house by these seemingly invisible scissors. Clothes, bedding and tablecloths were all found with the strange shapes cut out of them. Many reported taking handkerchiefs out of their pockets to discover them cut up. A tailor was due to deliver an expensive new suit to one of his clients, but he unfortunately took a route that took him past the Livingstons' home. When he arrived and unveiled the outfit, and the customer was not impressed to find it had been cut to ribbons. Another visitor of the house took off her hat as she entered and placed it in her pocket. When she went to leave, she pulled her hat out, only to find it had been cut into dozens of pieces. In another almost comical incident, a group of young men brought their dates up to the Livingston property one night to show off how brave they were on this haunted land. While dancing, one of the men heard the familiar snipping sound. He was mortified to discover his clothes had been cut, and his bare ass was now on show to his girl and their friends. But the clipping wasn't.
Well, it certainly sounds like somebody's got a sense of humor.
Yeah. Although I've never heard of a ghost that's, precise enough to just go around cutting up things like a pair of scissors.
No, you never know how much of these old stories are legend and how much of them are based on real things. Once a story gets out and starts gaining momentum with other people, it's difficult to say whether somebody decided it was funny and decided just to cut up some things, or people started playing into it because they wanted to be a part of the story. Like, oh, I delivered this, but it was all cut up when I got there.
Yeah.
It's hard to separate out legend from fact in cases like this that happened a long, long time ago.
It's not like there's specific documentation that would say, oh, somebody investigated this and discovered this or that. It's just people telling stories.
It's just people telling stories, and in this day and age, telling stories was the entertainment that you had. And the more interesting the story, the more interesting you were as a person. And it's possible that once stories like this started circulating, people started jumping on the story bandwagon, and things get blown out of proportion.
Just a mischievous act. It took on a bit of a darker tone when it came to the animals living on the property. It is said that one afternoon Mary Livingston was stood in the garden with a few friends, watching a family of ducks waddle through the garden, when they heard the familiar sounds of the snipping. Then chillingly, before their eyes, the ducks were cleanly decapitated. This also was not an isolated incident. The family were not able to keep any birds on their property. Each time they tried, the phantom shears would cut them to pieces. What was responsible for the incidents in Middleway depended on what side of the Christian fence you sat. The Catholics in the area believed that ghosts, or possibly demons, were responsible for what was going on. The Protestants, however, believed witchcraft to be the cause. Somehow the Livingston family had invoked the wrath of a witch. The family dealt with the haunting for seemingly years, and mostly referred to it as a nuisance. That was until one night when the fires returned. This time their barn caught fire, killing all the livestock inside. It was at this point Adam Livingston realised he needed to get help. Adam decided to contact multiple Protestant priests in order to get help. First he spoke to his Lutheran pastor, but was told that he did not have the power to exercise in his favour the power he had received from Jesus Christ to expel the dark forces from his home. The pastor told Adam that this power only existed in the old times. He tried a few other pastors, but it suggested they didn't think it was a case of the paranormal at all, and instead suggested that even mental health was an issue here. Next, Adam sought help from an Episcopalian minister and Scottish immigrant named Reverend Alexander Balmain. Reverend Balmain did actually attempt an exorcism on the home. It was a total failure, however. The spirit reportedly took the Reverend's prayer book and threw it into a chamber pot. After this, several Lutheran pastors did come to try to help, but were chased away by rocks and bricks being thrown at them from an invisible force. After
So maybe just get the guy a Catholic priest.
That's what I was thinking. It's like you're trying every kind of priest except the one the guy wanted.
At what point do you just fulfill the request? Like, belief is a powerful manifester. Like, maybe as we're living, we don't realize just how powerful the things that we actually believe in are actually shaping the reality that we're experiencing. If your spirit is Catholic and is wanting a Catholic priest, regardless of what you are, what you need is to solicit the belief, change the belief of the individual in question you're working with. Like, if you've got a deeply Catholic ghost, it's not going to do you any good to call a shaman or a witch or that particular personality construct needs to deal within their own set of beliefs.
Yeah.
So
being failed by his church. It's at this point that Adam seemingly attempted to work with folk magic practitioners, although again this wasn't successful. After the failed attempts to get help, Adam had a peculiar dream. In it he saw a man dressed in robes. He did not recognize either the man or the clothing he wore, but a voice said to him, "This is the man who will bring you relief." After talking about the dream with others, either Adam's wife or the McSherrys, the family's Catholic neighbours, convinced him that it was in fact a Catholic priest he saw, and that he should finally invite a Catholic priest into his home to help him. A Father Cahill visited the home. He was skeptical of the events that took place, but nonetheless was happy to come and see if he could help. Weirdly, a small bag of money that had vanished from one of the Livingstone's trunks some time before was found on the floor, the moment the priest crossed the threshold of the home. The priest blessed the house and used holy water throughout. This calmed the activity for a while, but didn't stop it. Within a week, the Livingstone family were contacting Reverend Cahill again. The church approved an exorcism to take place in the family's home. Initially, it was to be performed by a Reverend Bradley, but he apparently became so terrified of the activity that was taking place inside the house as he attempted to read the exorcism rites, that he then sent for Reverend Cahill to assist him. In a letter from Mary Livingstone printed in a local newspaper, she claimed the exorcism had in fact not been successful, and that their home was still being plagued by strange activity. Others, many of whom were connected to the church, began to blame Mary, claiming she was in fact behind the whole thing. Not long
Like, that makes sense.
it saddens me to hear that so many of the religious leaders, whether they were Catholic or anything else, have so little faith themselves. Like, these people are more afraid than they
Yeah.
are, and you can't walk into a situation like this riddled with fear yourself, and expect it to have any and the
A positive
yeah,
effect.
a powerful the powerful result that you're looking for. And it's sad to me, I'm not sure entirely either what all is involved in their exorcism rites. But plainly, there's a big difference between an exorcism and what the dying man was actually asking for, which was absolution.
Yeah.
They're wanting to be absolved of their sins so that they can move on and go to heaven. So, again, I'm not sure that that's actually accomplishing anything in this particular case. So it seemed, I don't know. I know they had a lot of beliefs about, I don't know, they needed to physically hear the words of confession in order to give an absolution. I don't know, but plainly the situation not handled well across the board by anybody here,
Yeah.
right?
And blaming the wife here doesn't make any sense. Who the would do that for years?
I mean, some people do have like attention seeking issues, or as you hear of cases of what is it, like Munchausen syndrome, where people make their kids sick for years just because of the attention and the sympathy that it brings on them. Like there are people who do some pretty weird stuff out there. The real question is whether or not we think it's feasible that the activity that they're talking about was done by some lady in the house.
Like lighting your own barn on fire?
Yeah, a person could certainly light a barn on fire. But can they decapitate ducks out of thin air? Unless somebody saw her running by with a pair of shears and decapitating ducks. But I don't, it doesn't seem to me like that accounts for the behavior that's happening. She might have been crazy enough to light a barn on fire. It doesn't seem to me like that would account for all of the behavior that's happening here.
Long after the exorcism, a second unnamed stranger apparently appeared one day at the Livingstone's door. He was a poorly dressed, barefooted man who claimed to be on his way to visit family. When offered a pair of shoes, he said he did not need them, as where he was from it was neither hot nor cold. He then said he was there to teach the family the way to his father. He stayed with the family for 3 days, and during this time spoke at length with them about the Catholic faith, seemingly in an attempt to convert them, which appeared to be successful. Adam later referred to this encounter as a visit from an angel. A few weeks later, Adam was startled to see a strange glowing light in the corner of his room. He became even more surprised when the light began to talk. It too claimed to be there to teach him about the ways of his new faith. It told Adam that it was once alive, just like him. It would bark orders at them to pray day after day, waking them up multiple times in the middle of the night to do so. It told them it was vital they fasted for 40 days on multiple occasions. When the family grew tired of this, the voice began to scream in a mixture of pain and fear. It claimed to be channeling the voices of those in purgatory, and that the family's prayers were the only way to help those lost souls suffering. On occasion, the sound of the voice would completely change, apparently also at times claiming to be dead relatives of the family. It also, much like the poltergeist, seemed to have the ability to control fire. At one point it burnt a cross onto a goatskin vest.
So, okay. Higher dimensional beings do not talk like this.
Yeah.
All right. Many people contact or have contact, hear things, see things, receive messages. They have angels or guides or ancestors, and anything that is using your own fears or your own prejudices or easy ways to control you in order to get you to do things or anything like this, using a significant amount of religious speak at you because that's what you believe is we're not interacting with actual higher dimensional beings at this point. Especially one that will straight up tell you, like, I used to be alive, just
hmm
like you. Like this is a transitioned physical human who's just figured out that you can get communication through, especially in a family where they've already experienced so much weird and already believe there's a ghost in their house, and you're starting to get people who have an open enough energy to start directly seeing or directly communicating in this way. But yeah, nothing like that that's coming through in a manipulative way of trying to tell you to take or do certain actions is you're not interacting with a higher dimensional being at that point.
They're basically just interacting with a person that's taken on the guise of something else.
The problem with it is especially in these days, like a soul that passed over that did not get absolution may actually believe it's a demon. Right? It was a common thought process that if you don't get forgiven for your sins, then you're going to end up in some kind of purgatory or some kind of hell state, and that's what makes you a demon or a monster or whatever. So if their experience of the situation is they don't believe they can pass on, they can't move on because of their sins, and so now I'm stuck in this state on this plane. I must be some kind of demon. So now I'm going to I don't know what else to do but to take on the role and start behaving in these ways.
The voice became increasingly cruel to the family, hiding food and at one point seemingly turning a meaty soup into water, before chastising Mary Livingston for not bowing to the Catholic Church's rules. It lectured the family about sins such as vanity, breaking mirrors if they were to look into them too long. The voice then started being blamed for inflicting physical pain on the family. When one of Adam's sons refused to do his reaping chores on the farm, his knee almost instantly became inflamed, an infection that kept him stuck in his bed for a year and a half. One day while out working the fields, Adam claimed he was overcome with the pain of the souls trapped in purgatory, and was found doubled over in pain, as white as a sheet by his family. On another occasion, the apparition of an arm manifested before Adam's eyes and struck him across the face, seemingly for no reason other than to harm him. The voice also appeared to know things. It revealed family members' secrets and sins. It spoke of forthcoming deaths, and even seemed to know of events that were taking place miles away to people they knew before news could travel to them. Adam Livingston's conversion to the Catholic faith seemingly lasted throughout the remainder of his life, and saw him donate the majority of his land to the church. He remained there for several years, living on the edge of the land before finally moving back to Pennsylvania in his final years. Some have said that he claimed the voice remained with him for 17 years before leaving him. Why it decided to leave, we do not know, but just 5 years later, Adam was dead. What we have here is an account of a haunting that took place over decades, but it has inevitably been warped through time, retold by many who have put their own religious or superstitious spins on it.
We will link this video in the description box. Go check them out, show them some love, and all of that stuff. They appreciate that, and so do we. So as he quite rightly points out, with a story this old that's been added to over time, there's not really a way to know how much of it is stories, how much of it is exaggerated,
The
how
line
much of
between
it
fact and fiction is way
right.
too blurred, but
From a purely speculative standpoint, a lot of what they're talking about is possible, especially in a time when a lot more people genuinely believed in stuff like this. It's no mystery at all as to why you have a lot more reports of things like this in times gone by than you do in modern times. People are just far more skeptical than they used to be, and it's entirely possible that the same events happening to a family today, the family would have been like, "Oh, that's weird. It was probably the cat," and rolled over and gone to bed, and the situation would never have escalated any further than that. You know what I mean?
but back then the situation would have been fed a lot more energy.
Right, and then it starts to get fed energy by other people in the town, stories start to spread, energy escalates, and it's entirely possible that that the whole situation got a lot more, momentum behind it than it really needed to have.
Which kind of tracks if we operate under the assumption that the man who died and became a ghost is the same thing as this light entity,
Mhm.
then it kind of progressed from just affecting the house and doing little haunting stuff to eventually kind of evolving into something that could directly communicate and just like, okay, if I'm not going to get absolution from having a priest come over, I'm just going to convert this family to Catholicism.
Yeah, in fact, the vibe that I get from it is it's entirely possible that this individual believed that in converting the family to Catholicism and absolving them of their sins, that in some way it would help them absolve their sins and move over. So it's entirely possible it was some sort of tactic to actually to actually purify themselves in quote unquote helping to purify and convert this family.
Yeah, it's kind of the impression I got there.
For sure. So, and in a time when people were ready and willing to believe that, it looks like the family did convert and the voice was with them for a long time, but eventually the momentum in it dissipated and the guy moved away and the energy of the situation fizzled out
And that was
around it.
that.
And that's that. Yeah. It's unfortunate that so many religious leaders and so many of the priests and actual people who could have intervened or done something about the situation really had no idea what to do and were either afraid to attempt it or didn't really have the solidarity of their own faith walking into the situation and viewed anything unusual or abnormal as basically evil. And so, attempting an exorcism on someone who just wants absolution was probably totally unnecessary.
Yeah.
The priest could have just walked in and said, "All right, well, Jesus has heard your confession. I'm living, I can't hear it, but we've heard higher powers have heard you. And so you're absolved and you can move into the light now. It's okay." And probably the the escalation of events was probably not entirely necessary.
Yeah.
Um,
And the escalation took a long time to kind of build it to that point, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, there was, beliefs on both sides of the fence. There was beliefs both by the individual who passed on, but also beliefs of the people in the house. They didn't want a Catholic priest in the house, and they did. That's unfortunate. Fortunately, like stuff like that happens a lot less nowadays. People are just they don't engage with it in the same way. When you hear something knocking around at night, it's like, oh, it must be the cat in the kitchen,
Yeah, it's either gonna get ignored or end up on a Ghost Adventures episode.
Right. And either way, people are just less panicky about it. Like the first thing people do isn't immediately, the armies of hell are in my kitchen. People are like, oh, there's some sort of haunting. I better call a professional. Like in general, people are just less panicky about the situation today than they were in olden days. So
Yeah.
it's much rarer for these things to escalate to that point nowadays. But good story. I've never heard of that one before.
Yeah, and it seemed like kind of a interesting one as it's essentially the first poltergeist that happened in America. Not sure what the first poltergeist in general would be.
I mean, I think stories like this have been happening always, and they crop up in cultures all over the world in various forms. And they always take the forms of the cultures they crop up in. This is an American poltergeist, and so it's surrounded by, religious stuff, and the story evolved that way here. But I'm sure that these kinds of stories have come out of cultures all over the world and have more of the flavor of the culture that they originated at coming out of it. So a super old phenomenon for us.
Yep.
It happens. I believe that this type of stuff actually happens, and it's really just the stories that we tell ourselves about what it actually is that affects how they unfold and the stories that get passed on about them. So anyway,
All right.
that's what I got on it. Like, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and we will see you next time on Unraveling the Unexplained.
Have a good day, folks.